Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosatris, and this week I wanted to talk about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and whether or not this series is still worth reading. So this is definitely one of those sci-fi series that a lot of people have heard about. It's very kind of present in pop culture, but I feel like it's not something that like a ton of people have read. There's always kind of the fandom, of course, everyone who really loves it, who encountered it and has read the series and really enjoyed it. But I feel like more people need to read this series because it's one that is very unique. There's nothing else like it, and it's very much sort of held up as a sort of sci-fi comedy since it was written. Now, originally it started out as a series of radio plays for the BBC, and then the novels came after. There have been other adaptations since, and Douglas Adams was always kind of tweaking the story as he went. The version a lot of people are most familiar with is the books. There's 5 books. It's called a trilogy in 5 parts, and they are fantastic, and if you haven't read them, you should, and if you have read them, you need to reread them. I just finished a reread myself, and I was not expecting it to have quite as much heart. I was just expecting sort of bonkers chaos, goofiness through the whole thing, but once you get to kind of the last maybe 3 books, there really starts to get more kind of depth amid all of the craziness, because this is very much a series that's about sort of the absurdity of life. And so all of the things that these books comment on are, you know, just the stuff that drives us all crazy in our day-to-day lives. You got things like bureaucracy, religion, cultural norms, class distinctions, all that kind of stuff. And so it's basically just a story about a normal guy who just wants to exist and be happy, kind of, and his kind of quest to do that as all this crazy stuff is happening. The first book begins with the main character, Arthur Dent, who sort of gets swept off of Earth seconds before it's demolished for like a space overpass, and it just kind of goes on from there, and it gets bigger and stranger as it goes. There's sort of this quest for the meaning of life at the heart of it, but there's not any kind of like nice, tidy answers to anything, nor should there be. This is very much a series about embracing the weird, embracing the fact that we don't know, and living life and just having fun and doing what you can despite all the strange stuff that's going on around you. Now, the radio plays spanned the 70s and 80s, and the books spanned sort of the late 70s to the early 90s, and they still feel present and relevant and just as good. It really does not feel dated. These books are so much fun, and there's a few cultural references here and there, but for the most part, like, everything that he's talking about is stuff that we still wrestle with in our daily lives and we still kind of just want to escape from. So it's very much still relevant. This isn't one of those like it's dated but it's good kind of things. It does not feel dated. And if you haven't read it, I'll say if you're a fan of Monty Python, Blackadder, that kind of comedy, then you'll get this. Also, if you're a Doctor Who fan, this is very much for you. Douglas Adams was a writer for Doctor Who in, I believe, the 70s and 80s. He wrote a lot of stuff for like the 4th Doctor. I think his most famous story is probably City of Death. That's a really good one. Imagine that these books are set in kind of that 80s Doctor Who atmosphere with kind of the creaky sets and the rubber monsters and the plastic props. It's just, it works better if you just imagine that it's all taking place in kind of this cheap, wacky sci-fi world. It's just so much fun. Now, in terms of adaptations, the BBC radio dramas that preceded it are also fantastic, and I believe you can find script versions of those so you can read them, but definitely if you can get a chance to listen to them, do so, because they are great. There was also a film version adaptation that came out in, I think, 2005, starring Martin Freeman. That is really good. It's just the first book, and I'm really sad they never made sequels to it. One of the highlights, of course, was Alan Rickman playing Marvin the robot. Just perfect. I think that was probably one of his greatest roles ever, alongside his role in Galaxy Quest, and of course, all of his villain roles, in like Die Hard and Robin Hood and all that stuff. But Marvin was made for Alan Rickman. It just works perfectly. Now there is a sixth book. It was written by the author of the Artemis Fowl series, whose name is, I'm gonna probably butcher this because it's Irish, I'm sorry, but I think it's Owen Colfer, something like that. And I haven't read it. It's called And Another Thing. The reason why this book sort of exists is because the fifth book in the series sort of ends on a down note. And Douglas Adams just wasn't a huge fan of ending the series on that kind of bleak kind of end point. And so, they wanted, the new author got permission from Adam's widow to write the book, and I haven't heard anything about it. I haven't read it, but I feel like it's still best to just end the series with Mostly Harmless, despite its tonal kind of shift, because there's always been kind of a dark humor at the heart of everything. There's always kind of this, like, everything's meaningless, so why worry, or why panic might be more appropriate. And so you've got sort of this quest for meaning, and everyone is always kind of disappointed constantly throughout their journey because they never really find kind of an answer to the meaning of life. But it's okay, like, it works. And so you've got this kind of ending where, well, I don't want to spoil it, but it's not like a happy, sparkly, they figure out what's going on and everything's great. But I think it works to have the series kind of end on a sort of, not dismissive note, but to sort of end on a bleaker note, to be like, you know what, we're not going anywhere meaningful, so just enjoy the time you have. And I think that fits the series so well that I'm okay with it. And so if people want sort of a peppier epilogue to the story, you can definitely read that book. But I have not read it, and I think the series just works as it is. Now, I will say there is sort of a tonal shift in the final two books, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish and Mostly Harmless. But I think they work because they focus more on the meaninglessness of just existing and dealing with everyday stuff. The fourth book takes place primarily on Earth, and deals with Arthur Dent trying to kind of get back into his normal life and discovering that he can't really do that. And then the fifth book kind of ties everything up, and kind of gives the characters all, a send-off. But the wackiness of the first three books, like the just goofy, hysterical situations in the first three books, really set up those more poignant later two books, because you've got kind of all this stuff happening, and then you've got time for the characters to sort of reflect on how they've changed as a result of all that. And I still think that works. Plus, there's all kinds of time travel stuff. There's multiple universes. It's bonkers and huge and wonderful. And the fifth book also features my favorite hilarious side character. All I'm going to say is his name's Colin. You have to read to find out who that person is. But just delightful. This whole series is great. I really enjoyed my time reading it. This was my read before bed book. So it took me a little longer to get through all 5 books, but they aren't really that long. Each book is pretty short, maybe 200-ish pages, so you can race through the whole thing pretty quickly. I think the entire series is kind of the same length as maybe a hefty sci-fi novel would be, with so it's fine. Don't be intimidated by it's 5 books. You can zip through it and it's fun. So definitely give this one a go if you haven't read it. Is it worth reading? Yes. It is still relevant, it is still hysterically funny, and it is still something that we need to keep reading. I don't want to go too deep into the details of the specific plot elements or anything like that, because the comedy works best when it sort of lurks behind a corner and then leaps out and mauls you at the last minute when you aren't expecting it. That is where Adams's genius lies, is these ridiculous turns of phrases and these tangents that just come out of nowhere and are just hysterically funny. So I don't want to get into the plot too much of the series, what the characters do, where they go, all that kind of stuff. I'll just say stick with it and just let it wash over you. If you've already read it and you read it like a long time ago when you were younger, I'd say give it another go because it still feels relevant and it still feels like it has things to say to us now living in, the 21st century. So this is definitely not a series that we need to sort of let drift into the past. We need to keep it relevant and we need to keep talking about it. So with that, I will say don't panic. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.